I always took the same route at dawn, leaving Leeds and going down the M1 until I was close to London. I've seen everything on the road: run over animals, overturned cars, people sleeping on the side of the road. But nothing compared to what happened that night. It was around 2:30 in the morning. I was alone, listening to a radio program that played only 80s music, when I saw something strange on the asphalt. A dark trail cut across the right-hand lane towards the central reservation. At first I thought it was oil or grease, but when I got closer, with my high beams on, I could see it was blood. Lots of blood. And the strangest thing was that it looked fresh. It still glistened in the reflection of the light. I slowed down, looked in the rearview mirror, and that trail went on for a few meters. I couldn't ignore it. You know that feeling when something is wrong, but your body is already moving on its own? That was it. I pulled the truck over to the side of the road and stopped. I turned on my hazard lights, got out with my flashlight in hand, and followed the trail. The metallic smell of blood was already strong, and the silence around me made me even more uncomfortable. No cars were passing by, nothing. Just the sound of insects and the roar of my engine in the background. The trail led toward a service entrance that led to one of those grassy areas between the lanes. The grass there was flattened, as if someone had been dragged across it. I kept walking, and after about 50 yards, I saw a truck parked, completely blacked out. It was one of those white flatbeds, with dirt on the side and something that looked like more blood. The driver's door was wide open, and there were handprints on the glass, as if someone had tried to hold on tight. The back of the truck was locked, but the side was scratched, as if someone had hit or kicked it from the inside. The whole thing looked like a crime scene. I called out to someone, just so I wouldn't say I hadn't tried. "Hey. Is everything okay in there?" Nothing. Not a sound. I got closer, the flashlight shaking in my hand. Inside the cabin there were clear signs of a struggle: papers scattered around, blood on the steering wheel, the passenger seat turned sideways as if someone had been thrown into it. I even found a cell phone on the floor, with a cracked screen, no signal. My heart started racing. There was no body, no one. Just blood, as if the person had simply disappeared. I thought about calling the police right there, but I admit I hesitated. I felt like there was something really wrong there, more than just a crime. I can't explain it, but the air seemed heavier, as if it were thick, hard to breathe. I'm not one to be easily impressed. I've worked on highways where there were bad accidents, bodies torn apart. But there, in that silence and with that truck looking abandoned in the middle of nowhere, I felt real fear. The kind of fear that leaves you standing still, in shock, as if your body wouldn't obey you anymore. Even so, I picked up my cell phone and dialed the emergency number, but the line dropped before I could even dial it. I stayed there for a few more minutes, trying to figure out what to do, when I heard a noise coming from the woods behind the truck. It was dry, like a twig snapping. I pointed my flashlight in the direction, hoping to see some animal, but there was nothing. Just darkness and that trail of blood that continued in the grass, disappearing further ahead. I thought about going back to my truck, leaving it behind, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But then I heard a second noise, louder. And this time, it sounded like a muffled scream. A human sound. It froze me completely. The scream was quick, short, as if someone had tried to call for help and been silenced. And the weirdest thing was that it didn't seem to be coming from far away, it seemed to be coming from underground. I know how that sounds. But the sound came from below, as if something was buried nearby. That's when I started walking backwards, trying to keep my eyes on everything around me. The flashlight missed me for a second, and I almost dropped everything and ran. But it came back, and that's when I realized something that made me lose what little control I still had: the blood stains weren't coming from just one side. There was another trail, going in the opposite direction. As if someone, or something, had dragged something away from there. I practically ran back to my truck. I started the engine and drove off. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I swear to God, the light from the flashlight I had dropped was still on, pointing straight into the woods, and there seemed to be a silhouette standing there. I couldn't see what it was, and I didn't want to know either. I drove for about 20 minutes without stopping, until I found a 24-hour gas station. I parked, got out, and went straight to talk to the security guard. I asked them to call the police from there, and I explained more or less what I had seen. They called a police car and asked me to wait. I waited, of course. But when they came back, well, that's when things got even stranger. The police returned after almost an hour. They said they had gone to the scene and that there was nothing there. No truck, no trace of blood, no sign of a struggle. Nothing. I insisted, asked to see the images from the highway camera, showed them the exact location, gave them the coordinates, explained everything again. One of them even wrote it down, a little impatiently. They said they would check it out in the morning, when it was light, but that I had probably gotten confused. These things happen at dawn, tiredness, lack of visibility, that's what they said. But I know what I saw. There's no way I could have made it all up. The smell, the blood, the scream. I sat on the bench at the gas station for a long time, trying to process it. I looked at my hands, covered in dried blood, because I had touched the truck door, I remember that well. When I mentioned this to the police, one of them looked at my hand and said he couldn't see anything. I thought he was joking, but when I went to the bathroom and washed it, I realized there was no stain at all. No mark. It was as if it had evaporated. And that's when I felt such anguish, such nausea that I almost threw up. I started to doubt myself, what I had seen, what I had heard. But not the feeling. The feeling was still there, as if something was still following me, watching me. I never went down that stretch of the M1 again. I changed my route, even though it added almost an hour to my journey. Every time I get close to that point, I feel unwell, a weight on my chest. I can no longer listen to music while traveling, everything distracts me, I'm on alert all the time. I've tried to talk about this with other people on the road, but most of them just laugh or say I dreamed it. But I know. I was there. And to this day I can't explain why no one else saw it, why the truck disappeared, why everything disappeared without a trace. It sounds like something out of a movie, I know. But it happened. The strangest thing? Sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, when the truck's radio picks up interference, I hear that same crackling sound of a dry twig, coming from nowhere. I've changed the device, I've tried to ignore it, but every now and then, it comes back. And every time it happens, I smell the same metallic smell in the air. As if something were passing by me again. As if that thing I saw, or thought I saw, hadn't stayed behind. It was just waiting for the right moment to appear again. I've heard some bizarre stories about Route 666, especially from older people who swear that there's always been something wrong with that road. I have to admit that I never paid much attention to them. I've always been the type to believe what I see, and since nothing had ever happened to me before, I thought it was just talk from impressionable people. That was until that night, on a trip between Gallup and Shiprock. It was around 3 in the morning, and I was on the most deserted stretch of the road, with no cell phone signal, and no other car in sight for over an hour. Everything was normal, until I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. I thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote, but when I got closer, I realized it was a child. She was there, right in the middle of the road, wearing simple clothes, like pajamas, and barefoot. Her arms were at her sides, and her face was turned straight toward my truck. I braked slowly, unable to believe what I was seeing. She was a little girl, she must have been 8 or 9 years old, with very fair skin and dark hair stuck to her face as if it were wet. But it was hot there was no way. When I stopped completely, she didn't move. She just stared. I swear on everything that she was staring at me as if she knew who I was. That stopped me. I spent a few seconds trying to decide what to do, and then I blinked. It was instinctive. When I opened my eyes again, she was gone. I got out of the truck with the flashlight, my heart pounding in my throat. I looked everywhere. No cars, no houses, nothing but desert. But there was one thing: footprints. Small, clear, leading from the road into the middle of the sand. I followed them for a few meters, and it looked like they had been made recently. The sand was still marked, as if she had just passed by. But there was no way a child could disappear like that. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I stood there, listening only to the wind and the sound of my own footsteps. I felt a shiver that made me freeze inside. I felt like I was being watched. Even though I was scared, I kept following the footprints. They were getting further and further away from the road and leading towards a rock formation, like dry hills in the middle of the desert. When I got closer, I noticed that the footprints stopped. Out of nowhere. In the middle of the smooth sand, they simply disappeared, as if the girl had evaporated. I knelt down, trying to understand if it was an illusion, if the wind had erased the rest, but it was clear: they ended there. No turning back, no continuation. That's when I heard what scared me most that night. Breathing. Weak, low, as if it were very close to my ear. But there was no one there. I froze for a few seconds. I couldn't move, I just stayed there, kneeling, trying to understand where that sound was coming from. It was like someone was leaning right behind me, breathing slowly. When I finally had the courage to turn around, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. But the feeling that someone was glued to me was still there. I stood up quickly, looked around with the flashlight, and that's when I noticed something else that left me speechless. The desert had become too silent. Not even the wind made a sound anymore. No sound, as if the world had paused. Just the sound of my heart racing and the echo of my footsteps returning to the truck. When I got back on the road, I was in for a shock. The truck was turned off. But I had left it running, with the headlights on and everything. The lights were off, the engine was dead. I went to the door and tried to open it. It was locked. I never lock the cab if I'm going down quickly, especially in the middle of nowhere. I took the key out of my pocket and, as soon as I opened it, I felt a cold wind coming out of the cab, incredibly cold, like the air conditioning on full blast, except I never used that. I got in and stood there for a few seconds, trying to figure out what was going on. The cab had a strange smell, half sweet, half sickening, like something was slowly rotting. I tried to start the engine and, luckily, it started right away. I turned on the headlights, and before putting the car in gear, I looked in the rearview mirror on impulse. The blood drained from my face. The girl was there, standing again, right in the middle of the road, at the same spot where I had seen her the first time. Only now she had her head slightly tilted to one side, and it seemed like she was smiling. A strange, still, emotionless smile. I blinked again, and when I looked back, she was gone. Again. I didn't think twice, I put the car in gear and accelerated full throttle. I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible, to forget that road, that night. During the first few minutes of driving, I had the feeling that the truck was heavier, as if I was carrying something other than the load. I can't explain it. The steering was harder, the engine seemed to be working harder. I kept checking my mirrors, hoping to see something. But I didn't see anyone else. Just the desert, the darkness, and the endless road ahead. When I finally got a cell phone signal again, I received several notifications about the time, as if my watch had stopped for almost an hour. But to me, it had been at most 20 minutes since everything happened. Something didn't add up. The road didn't seem the same anymore. To this day, I'm not sure if I left the place at the same time I got in. I arrived in Shiprock almost in the morning, still shaking. I stopped the truck at the first gas station and stayed in the cab for a few minutes, just trying to breathe. When I got out, I noticed that the tires were covered in sand, as if I had driven off-road for miles, but I was sure that I had been on the pavement the whole time. One of the attendants came over to ask if I was okay and said that I looked pale. I told him briefly what had happened, and he just nodded slowly. "You took Route 666 in the early hours of the morning, right?" I nodded. He didn't say anything else, just offered me a coffee and told me to be careful on future trips. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize. I thought I might have fallen asleep at the wheel, that maybe I was hallucinating because I was so tired. But every time I remembered the details, the girl's face, the sound of her breathing, the cold inside the cabin, everything came back to me with such clarity. It didn't seem like a dream. It was all too real. I showed the footprints I had photographed on my cell phone to a police officer friend. He said they really did look like a child's footprint, but the way they were in the sand, it looked like they had stopped in the middle of nowhere. Endless. And he even asked me if it was a montage. I deleted the photo right away. I didn't want to look at it anymore. After that day, I never drove in the middle of the night in that area again. Every time someone mentions Route 666, I change the subject. I know it may seem like an exaggeration, but there's something wrong with that road. As if it wasn't just a highway, as if it were a passage to some other place, or a point where reality doesn't work the same way. I didn't see any ghosts, demons, or monsters. I saw a child. Just a child. But nothing about her was natural. And that's what scares me the most. The fact that something so simple and common could still scare me so much today. Every now and then, when I'm driving at night on other stretches of road, I see figures on the side of the road. But I never stop. I never got out of the truck after that day. And, no matter how much I try to forget, that image of the girl standing in the middle of the asphalt still appears in my dreams. Always looking at me. Always disappearing when I blink. As if you were waiting for the right time to come back. As if it hadn't ended, you were just asleep. I was driving along a lonely road in Alberta, in northern Canada, when it happened. That part of the road is extremely deserted, surrounded only by dense forest on both sides and a heavy silence. It was late winter, early morning, and the sky was clear. You could even see the stars reflecting on the ice accumulated on the edges of the road. My CB radio, which was usually silent in that area, started to crackle out of nowhere. I laughed a little at the time. I thought someone was trying to start a conversation, even though it was almost 3 in the morning. But what came was not an ordinary voice. It was a whisper. A whisper that said my full name, very slowly. That stopped me. The radio was on, but no channel was tuned in. Just static. Even so, I heard it again. "Nathan, do you remember?" The voice was low, almost as if it were inside my head. I turned the radio off right away, fiddling with the buttons nervously, trying not to panic. But then it got worse. Even with the radio off, the sound continued. "Nathan, why did you do that?" The road was deserted, the forest pitch black. I slowed down and turned on my auxiliary headlights, thinking it might be interference from some device, some trucker joking around, I don't know. But then things got too personal. The voices started telling me things that no one could possibly know. Things about my teenage years, about my father, about things that happened when I was about 12 years old and that I never told anyone. An accident with my brother, which left a scar to this day. A day when I lied to my mother and pretended I didn't know what had happened. The details were so specific that it made my stomach turn. It didn't make sense. The road was the same, not a single living soul was around, and I had the radio turned off, listening to whispers from the past as if someone had been spying on me since I was a child. I stopped the truck on the shoulder, turned everything off, and sat there in silence, with only the interior light on. I thought about calling someone, but there was no signal. The cell phone screen was frozen, with no time, no network bar, as if time had stopped. It was at that moment that the whispers stopped. But then, for a second, I heard a different sound, something knocking on the passenger door. Softly, as if someone was tapping lightly with their fingertips. I looked out the window. There was no one there. But a light mist formed on the glass, as if someone had breathed from outside. And in the midst of the fog, 3 words formed, "I remember you." I got out of the truck like an idiot, without a coat, with just the flashlight in my hand and my heart racing. I walked around the entire vehicle thinking I would find someone hiding, some crazy person playing a prank. But there was nothing. Just the distant sound of wind cutting through the trees and the crack of ice breaking beneath my boots. I looked at the forest on both sides, but it was pitch black. The flashlight could barely illuminate 2 meters ahead. When I got back into the cabin, the ice on the window had already melted, as if it had never been there. But I saw it. I swear on everything, I saw those words written there with someone's breath. I went back in, locked everything, and stood there, with the engine off and the interior lights off. Just waiting for the feeling to pass. But the worst was yet to come. The CB radio, even though it was off, turned on by itself. Its little light came on, and the voice came back, only this time clearer, as if it were right next to me. "You never told anyone, did you?" It was a familiar voice, but distorted. And each sentence that came was like a stab, my secrets, fears that I never spoke out loud, memories that I thought were buried. One time when I stole money from my grandmother. Another time when I let a friend get hurt and lied about how it happened. It broke me. I started yelling inside the cabin, telling it to shut up, asking it to stop. But the more I yelled, the quieter the voice became. As if it was feeding on my despair. Suddenly, everything stopped. The voice disappeared, the radio turned off by itself, and the road was completely silent again. I couldn't tell if minutes or hours had passed. I started the engine and drove away from there as fast as I could. I didn't look in the rearview mirror anymore. I didn't turn on the radio anymore. I just wanted to get out of that damned stretch of road. But the weirdest thing was when I arrived at the nearest gas station, about 2 hours later. The gas station attendant came to help me, looked at me and asked if I was okay. I must have looked pale or like I had seen a ghost, because he even offered me a coffee. I accepted and went to the bathroom to wash my face. When I looked in the mirror, I froze. On my neck, just below my ear, there was something written, as if it had been lightly scratched into the skin, "I remember everything." I swear I hadn't had that before. It wasn't a tattoo, it wasn't dirt. It was like a superficial, fresh mark. I rubbed it, washed it, but it wouldn't come off. And worse, even though no one knew, I knew exactly who used that phrase. It was something my father used to say to me when I was a child, every time I tried to hide some mischief. But he died more than 10 years ago. I got back into the truck, not knowing what to do. The mark on my neck stayed there for a couple of days, then disappeared as if it had never been there. But since then, I haven't been able to use the CB radio. Every time I try, even with the new one I bought later, it just crackles out of nowhere. And sometimes, in more isolated stretches, I start hearing voices again. They're not whole sentences like before, just stray words, low laughter, my name whispered as if someone is testing my reaction. I avoid driving late at night now, especially in more remote areas. It seems that the more isolated I get, the louder it comes back. I told this story to two fellow travelers. One of them laughed, thinking it was a joke. The other one was silent and then told me that something similar had happened to him in northern British Columbia. He said that sometimes the roads hide things that we were not meant to understand. I thought about it for days. Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? Or is there something in that region that brings out these things? Whatever it was, it seemed to know too much about me. It knew things that I myself tried to forget. And that scares me more than any apparition. I've considered seeking help, therapy, anything that could help me understand or accept what happened. But deep down, I think part of me is afraid of finding out that it wasn't a hallucination. That it was real. That someone, or something, was really watching me. Listening to me. And what's more, that they still are. Because every now and then, without warning, the radio crackles. Just for a second. And even when it's turned off, I still feel like a presence is waiting for an opportunity to talk to me again. The strangest thing happened one recent morning. I was parked at a gas station in Saskatchewan, sleeping inside my truck. I woke up out of nowhere, with the feeling that I was being watched. The radio was off. But in the silence of the cabin, very close to my ear, I heard a whisper, calm, almost affectionate, "I'm here." I didn't go back to sleep that night. And to this day, when the wind blows a certain way, I hear that same whisper in the background. As if something was still nearby. Waiting. I used to drive past Bluebell Hill quite often. It's an old road full of strange stories, but I never paid much attention to it. People talk about apparitions, especially a woman who asks for a ride and then disappears, but until then, nothing had ever happened to me. That changed one rainy morning, around 2:30, when I was returning from a delivery in Rochester. Visibility was terrible, everything was blurry, headlights struggling against the thick fog. It was then that I saw a figure right in the middle of the road, standing still, as if it were waiting for me. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeched on the wet asphalt and the truck almost skidded. The headlights illuminated the figure in its entirety, a tall, thin man, wearing something dark and simple, like an old suit. But what made me freeze was my face. Or rather, the lack of it. Where the eyes, nose, mouth should have been, there was nothing. Just a smooth, pale surface, half shiny because of the light. I swear on everything that was there. I blinked, I screamed, and he simply disappeared. He didn't run, he didn't hide. He vanished into thin air. As if he had dissolved into the mist. I stood there for a few seconds. The road was completely silent, except for the sound of the light rain hitting the windshield. I got out of the truck with the flashlight in my hand and walked to where he was. Nothing. No footprints, no marks, no sign of anyone. Just the thick fog, the damp smell of the surrounding bush and that horrible feeling of being watched. You know when you feel like someone is behind you, but you don't have the courage to turn around? That was it. My whole body was covered in goosebumps, as if the air had suddenly gotten colder. Still, I turned around. And of course, there was no one there. But the feeling remained. It wasn't ordinary fear, it was something deeper, more instinctive. As if my body knew something was wrong there, even if my eyes couldn't see it. I quickly got back to the truck, locking the door as soon as I got in. I started the engine, and when the headlights came back on, for a second, I saw his silhouette again. Further away, stopped on the shoulder. Only now he was on his side, with his head slightly tilted, as if he was still staring at me, even without a face. I started the truck without thinking twice, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I didn't look at the mirrors. I just wanted to get out of there. But as I picked up speed, the road seemed endless. I know that stretch well. It's only a few minutes until the next curve where the descent begins, but it felt like I was stuck in a loop. The fog was still thick and everything around me was darker than usual. That's when I noticed something even stranger. The truck's radio started to hiss. And I hadn't even turned it on. Even so, in the midst of the hiss, I could hear slow breathing. Heavy breathing. I started to feel a strange heat on my neck, as if someone was very close to me, leaning against me. But I was alone. The cabin was locked. I ran my hand over the rearview mirror, just on impulse, and saw something that took my breath away. Behind me, on the bed bench, there was a shadow. Motionless. The outline of a body. I looked straight ahead, I really turned around, but there was nothing. And when I looked back at the road, he was there again, the faceless man, standing in the middle of the road, just like the first time. I managed to brake in time, but when I came to a complete stop, he had already disappeared. Again. I stood there in the middle of the road, panting, sweating despite the cold morning air. I turned on my high beams, the light illuminating the thick fog, and nothing. No sign of him. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger by the second. I fiddled with the radio, trying to turn it off, but it didn't seem to respond. It stayed on, hissing, as if it were stuck on some channel. Suddenly, a low voice, almost a whisper, came from the speaker. I couldn't understand what it was saying. It was more like a drawn-out lament, something that sounded like suffering. I couldn't identify it, but it made me incredibly uncomfortable. Without thinking much, I started driving again. I had to get out of there. After a few minutes, which seemed like hours, the radio turned off by itself, the fog began to clear, and the road returned to normal. It was as if nothing had happened. As if it had all been some kind of daydream. But it wasn't. I know what I saw, what I felt. When I got to the nearest gas station, I stopped the truck, got out unsteadily, and went straight to the bathroom. It was there, in the mirror, that I noticed the last strange thing of the night. There was a red mark on my left shoulder, in the shape of a hand. A large hand, with thin fingers, as if someone had touched me hard. I stared at the mark in the mirror for a few minutes, trying to figure it out. I rubbed it with cold water, but it wouldn't go away. It didn't hurt, it didn't burn, it was just there, like a reminder. I walked back to the truck in silence, completely exhausted. I didn't tell anyone that day. I was afraid they'd think I was going crazy, or that I'd hit my head on something. But as the days went by, I realized it wasn't all in my head. Because the mark disappeared 2 days later, but the feeling of being watched didn't. It still lingers today, especially when I drive past Bluebell Hill. Every now and then, when I'm driving late at night, I look in the rearview mirror and I think I see someone sitting in the back seat of the cabin. I don't turn around anymore. I've learned that whatever it is, it doesn't like to be confronted. It just observes. It only shows up when it wants to. And, strangely, the more I try to forget, the more the details of that early morning come back to me, as if they were implanted memories, always vivid, as if they had happened yesterday. The dark suit. The absence of a face. The way he tilted his head, as if trying to figure out who I was. I've heard other stories about this road, similar accounts. People who saw a woman, a man, figures out of nowhere that disappeared as if they were never there. But no one talks about the faceless one. Maybe because whoever sees him, never speaks again. Maybe I was lucky. Or maybe it's not over yet. Because sometimes, when I'm alone and parked somewhere far away, I feel that same cold air on the back of my neck. And, every now and then, I see fog forming out of nowhere, even on hot days. As if something were still following me. The worst part was a few weeks ago. I parked at a rest area, slept for about 3 hours, and woke up with a start, sweating. The cabin mirror, the small one in the corner of the wall, was fogged up, and there was something written on it with a finger, as if someone had drawn it in the middle of the night. 3 words, without eyes, I see. Since then, I avoid stopping for long periods of time. And I pray every night that I never come across that thing on the road again. But deep down, I think it's already with me. This delivery started out strange from the start. It was supposed to be a simple route to a point in the Connecticut countryside. When I saw the name, Dudleytown, on the paper, I thought it was curious. I'd heard of it before, but only because of the bizarre stories, like a cursed town full of urban legends. I didn't think it was real. But the address was there, with exact coordinates, and the pay was too good to refuse. I was supposed to leave a small load, a few sealed, unmarked boxes, at a driveway marked only by an old sign. No signature, no receipt. Just leave it alone and go. I accepted because I needed the money. Except that, as soon as I entered the wooded area, things started to get weird. The GPS stopped working about 10 minutes after I left the asphalt. No signal, no route. Just a dirt road surrounded by twisted trees and an uncomfortable silence. Not even the sound of birds. I started to notice that the curves in the road were too familiar. Every rock, every fallen branch, every sharp curve gave me a feeling of déjà vu. I looked at the clock on the dashboard and it said 2:16. I kept driving. After about 15 minutes, I looked again, it was still 2:16. That's when I started to suspect that something wasn't right. I tried to turn around, but the road wouldn't let me. It was too narrow. And then, after a while, I saw a clearing with an old wooden sign, Dudleytown. That was it. No houses, no buildings, just trees all around and a deafening silence. I got out of the truck, put the boxes where the paper told me to, under the sign, and got back in the cab. I started the engine, carefully backed up, and headed back down the road. But that's when things got really weird. After a few minutes, I passed a fallen tree, the same one from before. The next turn was the same. And then, there was the sign again. Dudleytown. I thought I had gone the wrong way, that maybe I had come back without understanding. I went down and saw the boxes on the ground. The same ones I had just left. Same position, same scratch on the lid. I picked one up to check, and felt a chill run down my spine. The delivery paper was still on top, with my signature on it, only it looked old and faded. I got back to the truck, sweating, and tried to get out of there again. But each time I tried, I was back in the same place. The road didn't change, the minutes didn't pass. It was like I was stuck on a scratched record, reliving the same stretch over and over again. I tried to stay calm, take a deep breath, and keep going. I thought maybe it was just exhaustion, that my brain was playing tricks on me. But the longer I drove, the more claustrophobic I felt. The forest seemed to close in on me little by little, as if the trees were getting closer and closer to the road. I looked at the clock again, 2:16. I opened my phone, just to be on the safe side. The screen was frozen, showing the same time, no signal, no battery, even though it was charged. I started screaming to myself inside the cabin, banging on the steering wheel, trying to wake up. But I wasn't asleep. Every detail was too vivid, painfully real. On the third or fourth lap, I can't tell, I saw something different. A figure standing in the middle of the road, with his back turned, wearing a dark coat. I slowed down, honking, but he didn't move. When I got closer, he turned. And then I froze. It was me. But not exactly. It was like a pale version of me, with sunken eyes and a blank expression. A reflection of myself standing there, as if he knew I was going to pass him. I swerved sharply, almost hitting a tree. When I looked in the rearview mirror, nothing. He was gone. But the image was etched in my head like a tattoo. After that, I started to notice other changes. Low voices, like whispers coming from the muted radio. Muffled laughter, like someone was sitting in the back of the cab. The road seemed darker, even with the headlights on full blast. And the trees, they seemed to be watching. I swear I saw one of them move slightly, as if it were staring at me. I started to wonder if I was still in the same reality. If this was really Connecticut, or if I had crossed some kind of threshold. It was like the city, or what was left of it, was holding me there. Like it wanted me to stay. On one of the laps, when I stopped again in front of the sign, the boxes had disappeared. In their place, there was only one, and on it, a handwritten note, "Delivery complete. Now it's your turn." I didn't touch it. I got back into the truck in a panic. But when I started the engine, I noticed that something had changed in the cabin. The rearview mirror showed something behind me, but I couldn't make out what it was. The whole cabin seemed darker, more cramped. As if I were inside a warped version of my own truck. And then, for the first time, the clock changed. 2:17, I thought that was the end of the cycle. But when I looked out the window, there was the road. The same. Still. Waiting. After that, I tried everything, turning off the engine, walking away, screaming, leaving the truck behind. But it didn't matter. At every turn, there was the road again, the sign again, the same clearing waiting for me. Sometimes the forest changed slightly, as if it were testing me. A fallen tree in a different place, a mist appearing out of nowhere. But in the end, I always returned to where I started. I began to lose track of time. It seemed like days had passed, but the clock only showed 2:17. Hunger, sleep, thirst, everything turned into noise, as if my body was trapped, but my mind was still resisting. At some point, I opened the glove compartment, looking for something that would help me understand what was happening. I found a yellowed page, like it was from an old notebook. I recognized my handwriting, but I didn't remember writing it. It said, "If you're reading this, it's already too late. You've accepted delivery." My vision blurred, my hands began to shake. It was like I was reading a note written by a previous version of myself. One who had been through it all before. One who knew what was coming next. In an attempt to break the cycle, I drove hard into the woods, ignoring the road. The truck bounced, hitting roots and branches, and all I could do was scream. But even off the trail, after a few minutes, the road appeared ahead again. The same curve, the same entrance, the same damn Dudleytown sign. Except this time, there were more trucks there. Idle. Empty. All different, older models with moss on their tires and rusty doors. Like they'd been there for decades. But no drivers. Not a soul alive. Just the suffocating feeling that everyone who tried to escape had failed. The last time I remember turning around, I no longer saw the road, I saw a street. Cobblestone, ancient, like a town that never existed. The trees were gone, and all around were dilapidated houses, all staring at me. And in the center of the street, the same sign, "Welcome to Dudleytown." But now, it felt like a permanent entrance. I turned off the engine, and everything went silent. A silence that lasts to this day. Because, somehow, I'm still here. Driving. Stopped. Waiting. And if you ever get a delivery for here, refuse it. Because once the road decides to accept you, there's no way back.